Alright, so a lot of you guys have actually been wondering what the best bloodlines for farming bosses are, so in this video we're about to find out. So if you guys enjoyed this video, remember to like, button, subscribe, let's get right to the video, guys. By the way, guys, what is your favorite bloodline for PvE content in Shindo Life? Feel free to tell me in the comments below, we'll be checking them out. Alright, so I went ahead and put the bloodlines into the do not use for PvE tier already, so all those bloodlines are already there, just so you guys are aware. Now, for this tier list, I am going to be explaining, the moves and what the best moves are for PvE and stuff like that. And I also, like I said before, I already put them into the do not use for PvE tier. If you don't agree with any of those slots, you can feel free to comment why it's good for PvE, because I genuinely believe that these bullets you should avoid for using for PvE content. Now, Akuma in general is just going to be for the C-Spec stack. The C-Spec does stack based on the amount of NPCs there are, so it does do a lot of damage to, the groups of NPCs for green scroll missions. That's about it for Akuma. Ash's Sword's going to be another average for PvE. It's just a very high damage dealing bloodline in general. Like, the balls from the C mode spec and the actual third ability of Ash's Storm are quite good for PvE content, and the second move is also pretty decent. It's mainly just because it does lots of damage from the mode and third ability, though. Boramaki's going to be another average for PvE. It's probably actually going to be below Akuma. The third mode is extremely good for PvE content due to the high damage amount it does. And the actual third ability and first ability are also quite good for PvE content. Gura Ren's going to go to the bottom of average for PvE. Now, this is because this bloodline actually does do quite a bit of damage in general. The third move is also AoE, which means that you can hit multiple NPCs. And the meteors will also do quite a bit of damage to them. Emerald is actually be the first better than average for PvE. It's mainly meant for the trap ability, which is the second one. The second ability does, when the boss actually runs through it, it does do a lot of damage to the bosses in general. So that's going to be the reason why Emerald's going to be better than average. Forge Red's going to be another average for PvE. I'm actually putting it above Boramaki. The mode does tons of damage in general, and the actual moves are usable for PvE content, mainly the first move. Inferno is going to be the first one going to best traveling moves. Now, guys may be asking, why is there a best traveling move tier? Well, this is because the actual traveling moves are extremely important for PvE content. A lot more important than a lot of people realize. The most important things for PvE is the amount of damage you can do to a boss and how fast you can get to the boss. The amount of damage does not matter if you can't get to the boss fast enough for the timer to even be worth using. Apollo says going to be another better than average for PvE. The C-Spec and third ability are really good against bosses in general. I'm actually going to bump this up to one of the best PvE bloodlines. This C-Spec seriously does a lot of damage to bosses. I was actually insanely surprised by the amount of damage it does, and the third move is also good against bosses as well. Kaiju is going to be another better than average for PvE. I'm actually be putting it above Emerald. The actual third ability of Kaiju, I believe, and the mode are really good for PvE content, just because they do a lot of damage and the mode can distract them. Karada is going to be another average for PvE. It just honestly does a lot of damage in general. That's always good for PvE content. Lava is going to be yet another average for PvE. I'm actually putting this probably at the very top, because the third ability does do a lot of damage to the bosses and, green scroll NPCs, but that's kind of the only ability you can really use. Now, Mecha Spirit. Mecha Spirit, I'm actually going to be including in the average for PvE tier. Now, people may be asking why. The reason why is because Mecha Spirit mode, the Z2 was actually buffed, so now it doesn't drain chi when you actually use it. Having ranged M1s is obviously a huge plus for PvE content, because you don't even need to get close to the boss or the green scrolls. And I do think that it is such a huge plus that it needs to be included into this list, because after they reduce the amount of chi drain, it is definitely a really good mode for PvE. Naramaki is obviously going to be in better than average. We're actually putting this at the top. Now, the reason for this is because Naramaki mode is actually extremely good for PvE content due to the high amount of stat. If you're unaware, the higher the amount of stats you have, the more damage you do. So this mode can actually be really combined with other things for PvE content that are generally going to be really good. So, for example, you can use Naramaki mode and then use abilities from the PvE bloodlines. Obviously, you won't be able to use Xeno, but you'll be able to make up for it in the amount of damage you can actually do. Now, it's worth mentioning that the actual abilities of Naramaki mode are actually quite good for PvE content as well, because they do a lot of damage, but the moves of Naramaki are really not the greatest other than the third move. Nectar is going to be another better than average at the very bottom. The actual mode, the Z-Spec, does a lot of damage. It does work against bosses. It does do a lot of damage as well. And the actual abilities of Nectar do a lot of damage. Nectar is one of the highest damage bloodlines in the game, and I do think just for that aspect alone, it is better than average for PvE, because the amount of damage it does compared to other bloodlines is pretty, gigantic. Paper is going to be a lot like Nectar. I'm actually putting it in average for PvE, probably above Forged Ren. The reason for this is because Paper actually does do a lot of damage in general. I'm actually putting Sound right above it, because it's genuinely just the same exact thing. Both of the bloodlines just do a lot of damage in general. Both of the bloodlines have, multiple high damage abilities. And the moves actually do work against bosses and stuff like that, and against green scroll NPCs. It also has AoE abilities. They both have, high damage single target abilities. Just generally, pretty good high damage dealing bloodlines for PvE content. Atomic is going to be a lot like Paper and Sound, but it's actually going to be worse. I'm actually putting Atomic probably probably above Gura on average for PvE. The actual dismantling bind ability and the beam ability are really good against bosses, especially Gen 3, because, you know, sometimes the hitboxes are super wonky for those. So it actually can be a good ability just for, you know, PvE content, just because of that. Pika Senko is going to be in the best traveling move tier below Inferno. Obviously, you do have the Pika Second, which is the flight ability. It's actually one of the worst traveling moves in the game now, because they actually did reduce how fast it goes. But it is still an extremely good traveling move. I still do see people use it on occasion. And the actual moves aren't that, you know, bad for PvE either. Now, Ryan Akuma is going to be another average for PvE. This one's actually going to be at the very bottom of average for PvE. In general, Ryan Akuma isn't really that good as a PvE bloodline, but it still can be used because the second ability still does a lot of damage, the third ability still does a lot of damage. Rengoku to be yet another average for PvE. I'm actually putting Rengoku probably, I'll be putting Rengoku probably above Forged Ren and below Paper. The mode is actually really good for PvE content, like the animal path does damage to bosses, so does the first ability in general. Also, the first ability can be good against bosses, just because it does do a lot of damage, but mainly the reason why it's going to be here is for its mode. Renshiki is going to be going on the better than average PvE at the very bottom. The actual mode of Renshiki is very amazing for PvE content, but please keep in mind that it is the second mode. You do have to level it up quite a bit, and you do actually have to unlock it from the boss, so you have to do PvE content to actually be able to use this PvE bloodline, which is a little bit, you know, off-putting, so, you know, I generally don't think that many people are going to be using Renshiki. Raika Shizen obviously going to be a better than average. I'm also going to be putting Shizen here. Shizen's also going to be going into the normal average for PvE because Shizen is just honestly a much worse Raika Shizen. Mainly people actually are going to be using the C2 mode of this for PvE content. The closer you are to the boss, the more damage it does. Raika Shizen could do up to like 300,000. Normal Shizen could do up to like 150. Sriracha Akuma, this one's going to be actually better for average for PvE content. Now, this is very funny because you think of Sriracha going like, oh, you know, Sriracha is a terrible bloodline. The final mode of Sriracha is amazing for fighting bosses. Like, seriously. A full M1 combo off of the final one, especially against the Gen 3 bosses, can do upwards of 100,000 damage from a single M1 combo. That is obviously very amazing. I do actually think that Sriracha is a very good bloodline for PvE just from the final mode alone. Satori Akuma, obviously going to be an average for PvE. I'm actually putting Satori probably... I'll put it below Mecha Spirit just because it's mainly meant for the mode weapon spec. That's kind of the only good ability for PvE content. Now, Scorch is also going to be going to average for PvE just because it's going to be... I'll be putting it above, you know, Paper and Sound. Now, this is going to be because it fulfills the exact same thing that Paper and Sound does. It just does more damage than them in general. Sengoku, obviously, the third mode is really good for PvE content, but we're putting it next to Boramaki because it's kind of the same exact thing. Third mode is good for PvE. It does do a bit of damage with the abilities as well. Shadow is going to be another best PvE bloodline, actually at the very bottom of best PvE. This mode, if you could hit the mode C-spec just right on a boss, it seriously does a lot of damage. It will completely destroy someone's HP bar. It is absolutely insane. And yeah, it is very, you know, funny in general. Just because, the C-spec damage it could do is absurd. Like, seriously. It could do half the health of a boss's health, pretty much. Shindai Ren is going to be, you know, probably, and I'll be putting it an average, probably at the very top. Now, the reason for this is because Shinren M1's second mode, you just spam them. You know what? I'll be putting it above Renshiki because it does do the same exact thing that Renshiki does. You just spam them. In general, that's good. Shindai Akuma, undoubtedly one of the best PvE bloodlines of the game. The clones and the meteor ability does a lot of damage. The clones can distract the boss, still does damage to them, and the C-spec does the same exact thing. Smoke is going to be another best traveling move right below Inferno. Inferno and Smoke's traveling moves are almost the exact same. It's just Inferno is actually better for PvE. I mean, PvP. But for PvE content, they're literally the same exact same. Tengoku is going to be another better than average for PvE. I'm actually putting it at the very bottom. No, I actually do think that this should go in average at the very top. Now, the reason for this is because while it does do a lot of damage, that's exactly what it does. It's just going to be meant for damage dealing, and some of the other bloodlines do more damage than it. Tsunami, obviously, is going to be going in better than average for PvE at the very bottom. The fact it's an EKG does make it, you know, higher up on the list, just because, you know, you could spam all of Typhoon's abilities. It does do a lot of damage to the bosses in general. That's Tsunami, not Typhoon, my bad. Typhoon is also be going in better than average PvE, you know, right above Typhoon. Now, the reason for this is the same exact thing, but, you know, the Tornado was nerfed. It doesn't do as much damage anymore, but you still can stack it somewhat. Izzy no Dokai, this one's pretty obvious. It is the best PvE bloodline in the game. It's not overrated at all. The C-spec does do a lot of damage to bosses. It's extremely easy to hit on a boss. And yeah, there's a reason why Xeno Dokai is the go-to PvE Bloodline. Alfirama Shizen is obviously going into the best PvE Bloodline at the very bottom. Alfirama Shizen in general is just a really good PvE Bloodline. If the mode drained less, it definitely would be up there right next to Xeno Dokai, but as it stands right now, if you just spam the abilities and use the mode, it does just fine against bosses. Now, Web is going to be another best traveling move. I'm actually putting it above Pikasenko, just because it does, travel more than Pikasenko in general, and just because it does travel more, I will be putting in best traveling moves. Now, Shiro Glacier is going to be going in average PvE. This one's pretty obvious. It just does a lot of damage. It's going to be, right next to all the other damage-dealing ones. There's not really much else to say other than that. Kagoku is going to be another better than average for PvE. Now, the reason for this is because the exact same thing as Shindai. I mean, not Shindai. See, Sriracha. If you guys use the Lava Dimension and then you stack it with Bunny Sage mode, this mode seriously does a lot of damage. But you do have to stack it with the mode to make it do that much damage, which is why it's not going to be in best PvE. Now, Naramaki 6 Pass, this one's actually be going into probably average for PvE at the very top. The mode does a lot of damage. That's generally the only thing you're going to be using for, from this Bloodline. Now, Strange is going to be another, better than average for PvE Bloodline, just because it does so much damage. It is actually funny that Strange is simultaneously one of the best PvP Bloodlines, and is also an extremely good PvE Bloodline as well. It just does a lot of damage. That's the main reason why. Rune Conchu is mainly for the mode. There's not much else to say other than that. It just does a lot of damage because of the mode. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, remember to like, subscribe, hosting it, guys. Bye-bye.